side.
Chairs. I feel underdressed in this chair.
I was thinking, I feel like I saw Zoe in either LA Burning or Let It Fall, or one of those films about the 92 uprising. And I was like, wow, what a fascinating person. I'd love to know more. And here's a whole film about this person and, her family and life and career. And it's, I'm just like, how did you go about discovering this person and everything? I mean, and deciding to make a whole film.
Yeah. Thanks again, everybody, for coming, by the way, and sticking around. This is gonna sound, I don't know, whatever this sounds like, but I started working on this project in 2014, and so at that point, she actually hadn't been featured on camera quite as much. Definitely not as Zoe, because she started transitioning right when I met her. And so it took me so long to get funding for this film that she started popping up in these other projects. And I was like, of course, because there's the ego. I mean, it's the same as these, everybody trying to get to the story first or something. And it wasn't like I was trying to break the story about Zoe. I was trying to do such a deep dive with her that I felt like the kind of piecemeal thing that was happening in these other films, and no knocking those, it was a little bit kind of hard to watch play out. But I first came across Zoe I think it was in she now, but it was Bob at the time, was quoted in a couple articles because Zoe and Marika, Bob at the time, was they were known, they were iconic, at least in LA. And if you were ever doing a piece about car, high-speed pursuits, they were like the first people to get your quotes from. And I read a couple of the quotes. One essay I would cite in particular is by Tad Friend in the New Yorker, called "Pursuit of Happiness," which is a really great essay on high-speed pursuit culture, and they're quoted in that. And I found them to be kind of candid and a little bit quirky. And then I Googled Bob Tur, and it was like the greatest hits of, the worst things that had happened in LA was what Zoe had been at the center of. And so I could tell the history of Los Angeles through Zoey Tur, and the name Zoe kept popping up. And I thought maybe that was Marika. I hadn't quite fully even understood who they were. And I realized just a couple months before Zoe had begun transitioning. So I just sort of remember absorbing all of this and thinking, I need to meet this person. And so I did. Yeah.
I mean, that's, I guess at what stage was their, where was their family at? Because, convincing them to have, all of them individually to participate in the story must have been an interesting challenge, because you're laying bare a lot of painful history, which obviously the first half of the film is sort of, it's very entertaining, and that you're sort of reliving a lot and sort of discovering this, the career, the professional side of them. And then as things really do get very personal and very deep into just what happens, as the stress grows and sort of the aftermath, the trauma of the 92, or the death threats that ensued from having testified and stuff like that. So it's just like really hard to watch the family dissolve. Where were they at when you first met them?
Yeah, so I was really naive when I came into it. In my mind, when I first started working on it, I saw Zoe as sort of a tour guide of Los Angeles. It was like, I was very focused on LA, and I think the film still is. It obviously oozes Los Angeles, but I became more and more interested in telling the story of LA through their personal experience. And so at first I was just kind of getting my bearings with them and talking to Zoe, and she was, her mind is going 1,000 miles an hour all the time. And so I'm picking up pieces about her family and a little bit about her career. And I and she was kind of saying, most of the work I did was with Marika, but Marika's, I was detecting some animosity and things like that. And there was like, it's clearly a broken family, but I was genuinely just trying to be like, okay, but that's all, I'm not looking to go there really. But I found in talking with Zoe and Marika, when I eventually met Marika, separately, that they wanted to explore themselves. I don't know if I mean, this is my perception of them. I don't know if they would necessarily agree with that, or maybe they would now, but I just got this sense like they wanted to explore who they were and who they are. And so as I was getting to know them, and that gets back to it taking more than 6 years to make the movie, it allowed me to very organically get to know Zoe and Marika in particular. I didn't meet the kids for years, and who are the kids, they're my age, but they were, in my mind, they're like the kids in the home video. But I got to know Jamie a little bit, and Jamie sort of then agreed to participate, and Katie was the last of the family to get involved. And when I finally talked to Katie, I could tell it was important for her to tell her mom's side of the story, and not just in the relationship, but really as her role in journalism as a groundbreaking female journalist. I think she was really proud of her mom, and when she realized that I wanted to highlight her mother's role as much as I did her father's role, I think that's when she kind of got more involved. So that was sort of the process, I think.
Well,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, quite frankly, this film, without Marika's point of view, really wouldn't work the same way, right? And so it's absolutely critical. So I guess my question then is, what was that conversation like when you first met Marika? Well, actually, what was the first conversation like with Zoe in terms of like, yes, let's do this. We're going to tell this story, but then actually, I really need to meet Marika and tell her story too.
I've been comparing, this is like maybe a weird comparison, but I've been saying it's almost like a version of Love at First Sight, but for a filmmaker. I was sitting across from Zoe, and it was like, I started my journey trying to tell this Los Angeles story, and it was like, you are Los Angeles, like in one embodiment of one person. Obviously there's so many iterations of LA, but that was one very like interesting, comprehensive version of it. And so it was like, I just told her sort of towards the end of the conversation, like, I need to make a documentary about you. And there was a certain amount, I don't know, maybe if it was like my gusto or my sort of interest or my background, but she, I think, maybe saw a little bit of herself in me, I might say. And so that's like the only way I can articulate why she kind of went with me, who I hadn't made a movie at that point and was, just kind of like wandering aimlessly through LA stories. So that was sort of the initial phase. And it just kind of, is very like, she's the kind of person you don't know when you're going to get a call from her, and she'll say, meet me now. It's like not like, it's not like, okay, I'll meet you on Wednesday at 3:30 and we'll get coffee. It's like, she won't pick up her phone, and she's like, I'm getting on a plane to Thailand right now. Are you coming? And I'm like, I'll see you at the airport. That literally, it was like the day before I got that call. So that was what it's like to be hang out with Zoe. And it is thrilling in a certain way. And it's intense and, at times exhausting, frankly. But there's this like rewarding thing with her. Testing your commitment to. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think at the time, to try to sympathize with her, I think she felt very isolated, and she didn't know what my role was in her life. And but I was quite committed to her, and I was serious about diving deep into who she was, both the good and the bad. But with Marika, it was like total opposite yin and yang. And it was like, but the thing with Marika is very guarded, kind of not volunteering a lot, but totally charismatic in a way that is different from Zoe. I was completely surprised at how much I found her story to be as interesting as Zoe's story. On paper, it's like, you kind of think, Zoe, and based on how many times Zoe's been interviewed in films and Marika hasn't, right? When you see Zoe in these films, these documentaries, people gravitate towards her. But I find Marika to be so interesting in a more earthy kind of way. She's such a good storyteller. Like when you see her in the film, when she's getting in the zone, she can hang just as great. And like, and she's complicated in her own way. Anyway, you got me going now, but she's like really, I find her to be totally fascinating and again, also kind of interested in exploring her past. And that was a different kind of dance, but it was, I was thankful for that and also a rewarding experience. So yeah, but she's somebody who'll call you on like Wednesday, you can meet at 3:30.
But what I mean, when you pitched it to her, what did you say you were like? How was it presented to her so that she was like, yes? I mean, because it's so much of a you go so deep into their personal lives, and part of I think what makes it such an important story about like the human condition is that you have not just their points of view, you have access to these like outtakes that really show what's happening objectively. So it's not just a he said, like you're getting rare material.
It's an interesting word, objective, because I think you're right in the sense like the camera documents objectively. But what I found to be so interesting about the material that I had to work with was it was actually subjective in the sense that you're seeing what Marika's seeing. So there's times in the film when I think that the film can be particularly challenging because you're not just feeling what they're going through or being told what they're going through, you're looking at what she's looking at. And so, like the one that I think of often is the rocks, looking for the rocks, and also looking for the jet skier which is of course like this like crazy fusion of LA. Yeah, they're at Universal Studios looking for the Waterworld jet skier, which is like the most like, another kind of quintessential LA thing, but it's like you're watching this relationship disintegrate and you're seeing the anxiety trying to fulfill this request. And it becomes a very subjective experience where I would kind of describe it. And, there's often, Zoe's holding the camera too. So you're kind of bouncing between these two characters. There's this Bigelow movie called Strange Days. Yeah, exactly. And in Strange Days, you put on these goggles and you're like living somebody else's life. That's kind of what it felt like to make the movie in a lot of ways. So I was kind of there. But to maybe get back to the point is, I think Marika was a little more pragmatic. She was like, I think this would be good for the archive. I think that was like kind of part of why she wanted to be involved. She was like, the archive, you see a shot of the archive in the beginning in the storage unit. And she was really taking care of that, kind of like guarding it in a way and slowly digitizing it whenever somebody would come in with a request like, do you have the McMartin trial? And she's like, I think so. Dig through the archives. I think she was burdened by that archive. And I told her, I was like, I want to digitize this entire archive. And so I think she was like, go on, so it's like, I think that was there, but then,
and this is why it took 6 years to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's true. I didn't start the digitizing until I finally got funding, which took 4 years. So once I got funding, then things accelerated. But the first part was sort of that. But, I got to know Marika and kind of, I think that, there's kind of a lot of, I think, shame that is swirling around between both of them that it took me a while to parse out. And that's like shame by the abuser and the abused. And so like you kind of have this, that you're kind of working through that with both of them. And I think they both want to, reconcile that or reflect on it. And so there was a little bit of that kind of going on that I was delicately trying to dance, because I didn't want it to be necessarily like this expose or judgmental thing. I wanted it to just be like a emotional, experiential thing. And so that's how I approached it. I don't know if that's exactly that's what I intended it to be.
Well, I mean, but particularly that last tape, I mean, that when you talk about shame, I mean, I'm thinking of them today, you know, like who's authorizing the use of that clip? Because, you know, is that Zoey saying, you know, obviously in a much different place in life now, sort of reflecting and saying, yes, this is something that I am ashamed of having done, and I think that it's only fair that, you know, in service to Marika, that people know that this was who I was. It's not who I am now. And I'm ashamed that that's who I was. And then Marika felt shame at the time that she was allowing this to happen to herself, and wouldn't tell people about it. That she says that in the film, right? But now may not want that kind of material to be sort of freely accessible to people. And it was an outtake; it wasn't meant to be seen. So I'm really curious about that.
You kind of took me into the process a little bit, and sometimes I found, because, you know, the film is screened at some festivals, and I've seen some responses, and some people can be quite like vitriolic towards Zoey, and that's fair. That's like, you know, if that's your response, that's your response. But I always kind of, my take is that the only reason we know about this is because she provided access to it. And so there's, I think it's not quite as easy to just sort of say like bad and good. It's much more, I mean, the process in which we come to know about this stuff is through cooperation with them. But that said, what that entailed was Zoey saying anything in the archive you can use. So she just gave me carte blanche to use it. Marika as well. I think Zoey knew what, not specifically that tape that we found, but she knew who she was. She knew that that was a part of her past. And I think that there was this, this kind of bold attempt on her part to reconcile with, you know, her past. And so she kind of handed that over to me and say, like, do what you will with it. I think she still wanted to be, you know, she's quite mythologizing, and you can kind of see glimpses of it even in that last moment of that frame when she's, you know, kind of getting quite emotional, and she's getting really raw and really open, but there's still this like mythology that's like kind of, it's like such a fascinating thing for me to watch, because it's not just like, oh, now here's where we feel sad for somebody. It's like this inner turmoil you're seeing play out. So it wasn't like she was like, oh yeah, you found that great, let's do it. You know, it was a very, you know, kind of painful process for her to go through. And so I had a lot of respect and a lot of admiration for her, because who else looks at their, you know, the things that they've done that they're not proud of like this. I mean, it's kind of incredible, I think. And so I think with Marika, it was a little bit more in the opposite way, where it was like about her sort of talking about like what her past experience was. And I think that her trauma kind of, she was trying to push down. And I think now there's like a little bit more processing going. Sorry, it's a lot to unpack. And so I actually don't quite try to, I feel like I've been in quarantine now, so I'm like unleashing all my thoughts on it. But like, yeah, I like the film to sort of speak for itself and be that for people. So,
all right. Well, I on a lighter question, I guess, since you spent so much time. No, well, I mean, maybe. I mean, some of the footage that you digitized that was really cool, but served no real story purpose that you couldn't include. What was some of the coolest stuff you found?
That we didn't include?
Yeah. Oh, and then actually, you know, while you're thinking about that, the Burbank, what on earth was happening that there was like a flood?
Yeah.
What was that?
The Sepulveda flood
basin. This
Unbelievable.
flood basin. Yeah, that's like a. It
looks like
a runoff.
Katrina. I mean,
I know it's well. That's in. Well, I guess when I grew up in LA, we had rainy seasons. You know, like, and it would like pour, and you would get like a couple months of just luge coming in, and so
I've been here for El Nino in in '97.
Yeah.
I remember because I didn't go to class
You were
for
in the-
like 2 months because it was raining.
Yeah.
But it never got that bad.
Yeah, I know it's insane. Yeah, there'd be these flash floods that pop up, but you know, most of my understanding now is informed by that footage that I saw. But yeah, that one shot of the Burbank sign where the water line's up to there, it's like incredible. Yeah, and Larry, shout out to Larry. Okay, this is just like one thing. There's a couple things I'd find in the archive. One is, they'd be flying over the beach, getting beach shots, and there'd be women flashing the helicopter, and so I'd like feel like I'm like, you know, kind of like suddenly a voyeur, like I wasn't trying to be, but it would happen occasionally. And I was like, I don't think people flash anymore like they used to. You know, it's like kind of like those days are kind of past. But there was also this one. These are like the absurd things, but like they were like flying, you know, because after OJ had gotten, you know, taken it and the trial was going, and they were just like around the house every day getting whatever they could. It could be so mundane what they were filming that, you know, there's no time. Some of the interesting stuff to me was the mundane things in their videography that would, you know, there's no way to fit in a 5-minute shot of flying over OJ's house in the daytime with nothing happening, and then suddenly the camera just finds a dog in the yard, and then the dog just takes a poop, and they just film that, and I'm like,
all right, dude.
This is the state we're at.
Go back and put that under the credits, man.
Yeah, just that's. There was some people that were like, "You should do outtakes." I was like, "No, I'm just gonna let this song ride it out of that." But yeah, that's just a couple examples. Literally, I've watched hundreds of hours of their footage. Those are a couple things that happen to come to mind now. So, yeah, 90s.
Well, now it's a digitized archive. So
yes.
What
Yeah, I've handed it back to them. Yeah, I was super proud. I mean, it was like, I was guessing. I like to throw out. It was like 1 ton of tape. You know, like literally 1 ton, and then it's a cinder block size hard drive now. 40 like 243 terabytes. So, which is, you know, incredible, and yeah, super proud to do that, and I was happy to pass that off to them. I thought it was a nice, you know, symbolic moment to like bring that back to them at the end of the filmmaking.
Right, I do want to open it up, but I think we should just talk briefly about the response that the families had to the film, because we were talking briefly earlier outside about the daughter and sort of her reaction to the trailer, and I just thought, you know, what are their thoughts to the final product, in the sense that, you know, you're dealing with 4 very unique experiences, you know, people who have lived individual lives, and you're telling, honestly, you're really focusing on the parents, but the kids are a part of it too. So like, they're all going to have their own unique opinions. I'm curious how they differed.
Yeah, it's really complicated, to say the least. Really intense to show it to all of them. I showed it to Zoey, Marika, and Katie individually, and then Jamie just went to Sundance and watched it for the first time at the screen. It's like, you were wild. But yeah, so anyway, I was trying to show it to him also beforehand, but he was just, I'm just gonna see it there. So I mean, Zoey was the one I was most nervous about. Obviously, it was a really, you know, it's an intense dive, and we did all the interviews together. She knew what we were getting into, but there was a point early on when I think Zoey says some joke, you know, some kind of lighter joke, and Zoey was kind of I remember when she first watched herself walking out in nature, it was in the winter and she happened to be wearing a beanie. I remember she immediately took her beanie off as though she was getting so hot that she was like nervous. And then she kind of started laughing and then went along for the ride. And she watched it like an audience member watching it, and she got really into it, and she finished it, and she said, this is what she said to me. I'm not saying this is my phone. She's like, it's a masterpiece. And I was like, okay. I was like, that's great. And then I think it started to sink in and some anxieties and all sorts of stuff. So there was a long process of talking to her. And I mean, the stage from when she saw it to Sundance was a very like roller coaster ride of emotions that I totally sympathized with and tried to hang with her during that process. And I was kind of at that point part like family, part enemy to her. I was very complicated, I think. So yeah, I think she still has a very hard time with the film. I think it's not a movie that she wants to watch again and again, but I think that the process was well, I won't speak for what it was for her, but that was kind of the process of watching it with Zoe, and then with Marika, it was I think Marika loved seeing, I'm really proud of the sequence when Marika's learning to shoot from the helicopter, because it just, I think, captures the energy of what she was doing so well. Like when that door opens and she whips out and is filming. And so watching that with her, I could feel her excitement, like she was kind of having this moment. And I think that, I mean, she dug it. She dug it. She was like totally all in. And her boyfriend now used to work at Hard Copy, and which is like another kind of like 90s relic kind of show. And he was like, it was just like that, So I was kind of very like stoked to get the Hard Copy stamp of approval, because that was kind of the vibe that I wanted to, take people into, kind of for real, actually. That like sort of like shameless pursuit of news. And anyway, I mean, I'm rambling about these. Katie was super emotional. That was a tough one. And she doesn't have much of a relationship with her father right now, with Zoe. So that's kind of the most they like communicated with each other, is to watch the movie, talking to each other. So, and then Jamie was just like, I love the name of the movie, and so there's like, Jamie's super cool operator. I think Kate, they're all kind of, I feel like the story continues. And so I don't know if some people find that unsatisfying because there's not this like kumbaya kind of thing where they all come together. But this is the story of the family when they were together. Zoe and Marika were together. And I would love to continue telling that story. And I wonder if that might happen. But I also understand that, they might not be interested in going there.
Well, it's true. It is sort of almost an unexpected gut punch when Zoe does admit, I have become my father, right? You just, for some reason, it's your expectation of a movie. You don't like expect it. So you just sort of like all of a sudden go to that sort of really sad place, and you're like, oh wait, this movie's almost over. Like, oh no, this isn't going to end well. And so it's like, obviously they're not together because, that the family's not together because it's always been presented in such individualized spaces, right? But and then there's just no scenes of reconciliation, and that, obviously it's hard to.
For me, the catharsis is the depth of exploration when she says that about herself. That for me, it's not necessarily a happy ending, but it's a like depth that she reaches that I personally find to be really powerful, and that I think slapping any sort of thing in after that feels like, I don't know, kind of superfluous, or like it's too hard to be vulnerable in that space. So I'm going to kind of like ease the audience out with something. So, I do give us some nice music to kind of like bring our shoulders down a little bit and take that out. But that's kind of, I think that was like the kind of the real impactful core there. So yeah.
Well, what was the inspiration specifically for this title?
For Whirlybird?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other advantage of it taking so long to make, is I had a long time to figure it out. But I just heard that nickname for a helicopter, and I was just like, God, it's got like so many. It just feels like Zoey's story. That word, whirlybird, it just feels like Zoey, and so that was my. It just like kind of locked in place there. So. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone want to jump in? Ask away. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about the archive. Just how you didn't like drown in all that footage. How you found the stuff that ended up in the film, and how you decided the moments with Zoey and Marika's journey that you should kind of go with.
So he's asking about working with the archive and how you just sort of managed to get through without kind of drowning in it to find all of these moments with Zoey and Marika.
Yeah, thanks. You know, it was like when I was drowning in it, which I was at times, it was like, well, at least I digitized their archive. So it's like, I did that service. But the truth is, I mean, I had a great group of people I was working with. The post-production facility run by Matt Radecki, Different by Design. If you guys ever need a digitized archive, please go there. They developed this. We developed this system really that I think built off of previous projects that I had been researching, like Senna, for example, or Amy, the Chris King films, the archive films. Grizzly Man, which is one of my all-time favorite movies and a big influence for me on the filmmaking. Just kind of seeing how they put story together and how they organize. And so we did it pretty methodically, though. We had all of the archive, and we just moved it from their unit into our own storage unit. And then we took batches to the post-production house, and they would digitize throughout the week in 2 different decks, popping in 2 tapes. And somebody was literally, we kind of joke, it's like almost like a Clockwork Orange, that guy who was like just like watching LA insanity for hours and hours on end. But at the end of the week, I would go and I would pick up a drive. And so it would be the week's worth of digitized stuff. And I watched probably 200 hours on my own before I brought anybody else on. And then I brought on our editor, Brian Palmer. And I kind of at that point was like, I knew what I wanted the story to be. I knew I wanted it to be their relationship. And it simplified it as much as possible. I want it to be the story of 2 people who find each other, go on a journey, and break apart. And so every moment in the film really is driving that. And so that helped. That was a really good guide for the archive. It was like, does that fit into this story? And fortunately, some of the biggest moments in their career they did together. So it wasn't like I had to sacrifice exploring the riots or the OJ pursuit, because they did that together. And if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're flying over OJ, filming it, that's going to be a pretty big moment in both your lives you're sharing together. So it doesn't feel even like, oh, now we're going to cut away to a historical moment that they covered. It's just, it's all kind of there. So, but then we also had a handful of assistant editors, and we sort of devised a organizational process in Premiere that was different timelines that would say, whether it's B-roll, day, sky, LA, or day, ground, LA, and then we would just putting it further and further, and then anything we found of our characters we put in a separate timeline. So that's kind of generally how we started doing it. And then with that, we also had a Google spreadsheet which logged every single tape we digitized, and had a sort of almost metadata keyword search. So we could go in and hit Apple find Marika, and I get 150 hits, and then I kind of click through, and it kind of went from there. So I get tense just thinking about it.
Did you have somebody transcribe it? Could you control find for a specific soundbite, or did you not get that intense?
No, we didn't get that. We didn't get that deep. No, and to a certain extent, it wasn't like we were buried in archive, but I didn't feel like I was buried in material with my characters. Those were almost needle and haystack kind of things. Cause other than the reporting, you know, it's very like kind of hard to even predict. But you know, the example I kind of give is like you're watching the tape, the raw tape, and it's you know, it's a crime scene, and then it cuts all of a sudden to like Katie taking her first steps as a baby, you know, and that's like 30 seconds because that camera is at home, and so they're filming, the majority of it is for work, but then they're like, oh my god, she's walking, film her. And so that would kind of be it. So we were still discovering stuff deep into the process, but you know, because we were still digitizing, still organizing as we were editing. But the yeah, so no, the only thing transcribed were the interviews. So
you mentioned how like a lot of it throughout the film, how in the helicopter, Zoe at the time was just consumed by work and everything like that. But in going through the archive footage, you mentioned like, oh, it seemed like the dog on the lawn. Were there moments where you heard a conversation between the two of them that was so normal, just in the helicopter, where it was just like, what are we having for dinner? Or was it always?
I was wondering.
what are you having for dinner was the literally what we said often that we were looking for. We're like, where's the what are we having for dinner conversation? And there wasn't a ton between that. I mean, not even a ton. I at the moment, I can't even really think of something that sort of casual. There was this great scene though that I just couldn't quite fit it into the film, but they were flying to Vegas, and Marika's like in the back, like reading, you know, a magazine, and you know, Bob is like, you know, they like literally landed at a fast food place to pick up fast food. They're like eating Burger King, and I was like, oh my god, this is literally, it's like so normal. It's just a helicopter instead of a car. And you know, the one thing I would say though that felt kind of mundane that is in the film is when they're looking at Katie at the soccer game. I feel like that's so, you know, it's like two parents that are kind of dipping in from work, you know, and it's just like, oh, I think is that Katie right there? Yeah. Yeah, that's Katie. And then Katie, of course, knows that it's them right there, and she's just like, you're embarrassing me, Mom, Dad. You know, so that's the closest I think I was able to get to it. But I do couch that in sort of an intense, work-obsessed phase, so maybe you don't quite get that feeling. There's some later stuff. You know, now that I'm thinking about, there's some home video stuff, like when they're on vacation, things like that. But that's part of it, is like when they were on vacation, the camera was with them, and there was always this kind of edge of like, we could do a project, you know? So.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah. It's funny that it is what we said. It was like, what are we having for dinner? It's a conversation.
Yeah, this is a very briefing documentary. Thanks for that. I was wondering, like, in this 6 years of a process, you from reviewing the archive and to do the interview, at which point, because you never know what they'll have answered in the interview, so at which point you know that you can build your story on Zoe and Marika, and then to build into like kind of internet into the deeper interview.
Could you repeat that very last bit?
So at which point you realize you can build a story woven on their relationship?
Yeah. And so at which point did you realize that you would tell the story as being about their relationship?
Yeah, I there's a very specific example for me. It was the baby tape when Marika's pregnant. I saw that clip and I knew that I could tell the story, even though there was so much more I was still yet to find. But seeing them sit there and it is everything. I mean, it's that thing I'm talking about with their work and their life intertwined is, you know, they're talking to Katie about the work that they do. They go around filming news stories, and they're all glowing with being pregnant, and there's still like a hint of control and this like, it's like fun, and you know, and also just the quality just looks amazing. Like that beta tape is like, it's just got this unique color to it. So that was a big moment for me when I saw that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because you talked about talking to Zoe and like having that moment of like, this is
with the other members of the family and other subjects of the documentary, did you like ever work with them before filming and like interview them just personally to kind of get a grasp of like the narrative you were looking for?
Katie and Jamie, I'd only had a couple conversations with on the phone. Marika and Zoey, I often have found myself having lunches with them. I mean, I had lunch with Zoey, you know, I don't know, dozens of times trying to make it. And so we would just sit and talk. And sometimes I would talk about her past. Sometimes I would talk about her present. And I also did preliminary interviews with them that never made it into the film, that were like I basically set up it was a 5D at the time, which is kind of like the best DIY sort of camera to use, that I was filming them, and it was like direct to camera interviews, which were pretty informative. So there was a lot of pre-research before I sat down and did these interviews, a lot, you know, and I watched a lot of the archive. So going into these interviews, I really knew what it was about. I think that, but Zoe, yeah, anyways, a long story, but yeah, that was sort of it.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
The story is so intimate, and just piggybacking off of what he asked, when you were interviewing Zoe, like in all the subjects basically, did you find that it was more of like the conversation, or did you have like your bullet points list of questions? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I must have had like 15 pages of questions for Zoe, if not more. And I largely what you see on screen is kind of the way I did. I mean, it's mostly a chronological story, so it was just kind of charting their history. And yeah, I really went through that. I've done a lot of interviews previously, you know, on other projects that I'd done. I'd worked for Vice for years and done tons of interviews. So I had a general style that I like to interview as, and it is kind of conversational. I kind of talk about it like in an immersive way. I really try to prevent, in the case of this type of storytelling, I want the person being interviewed to almost be having like a recall, you know, like a flashback. I don't want them talking with their like pre-canned lines about like, well, the riots were about this and that, you know? And it's like, yeah, you've been interviewed about the riots 100 times. You have your talking points. So the best way I can get what I think is most human out of you, as raw as that might be, is to really try to prevent you from talking like in the past. I want to talk in the present. Use sensory things like, what did it feel like to be up there? Was it hot that day? It was like a lot of that kind of stuff that I was really trying to get them to get in the zone. And sometimes Zoe and I in particular, it would be this like kind of crazy sync that would happen where she'd kind of know where I was going, or feel like what I was getting at, and go there with me. Other times she'd be like, "You just interrupted me. You just ruined that line." I think we got it.
Would you use that technique where you showed like the clip and then they would react to it, or was it more? It wasn't that.
No, the reason why I shake my head is it's definitely something that I know I'm familiar with, and I considered, you know, like you set that up, and I just relied on like, you know, this, you know, like talking to somebody and knowing their history so intimately that like I felt that I could evoke that experience more than if I like said cut to tape kind of thing. So I'm not poo-pooing it necessarily. I think it could be an effective thing, but I sort of conversationally like that approach, and I think that it makes you sort of connect with them, I guess, a little bit more. So
it was just so seamless. Some of the edits, like at certain points, it almost looked like Marika was directly reacting to a clip. That's why I asked, but I guess it's a testament to the editing and the time you took to make the story. So
yeah, thanks. Yeah, there was times in which I could feel them like really going back into it. Like I remember one time like Marika like shifts and she's like this, you know, and so she's like in the helicopter in her mind right there. She's like looking out the helicopter now. So getting them into that state was a big part of the process. So yeah.
Okay, so the film is coming out theatrically, and
Oh,
you have a question?
quick question,
Yes.
just a quick one. Did they keep all their home movies in their archive, or was that like somewhere else?
No, that's all. It was all in the same tapes. Like it could cut from one thing to
Really?
another.
So it's the same. Okay.
Same tape, same
tape,
camera.
okay,
So
yeah.
sometimes there's a little bit of labeling, but not much. So yeah. That was a big part of the process, and Easter eggs.
Right.
Yeah.
Santa Monica Lemley, Newhall.
Yeah, we're doing there's the film's playing for a week at the Santa Monica Lemley. It's also going to be doing some kind of one-off style shows. So there's going to be another screening at the Glendale Lemley, and then the Pasadena Lemley, and the North Hollywood Lemley. But you guys are all here, so you don't know.
Well, but it's also available for digital rental.
Yeah, and it's streaming too, so it's on Apple and Amazon. All on Friday, so that's all happening on Friday. So finally happening. Let's see how it goes.
Thank you for braving the indoor screening.
Oh, thank you guys. I know y'all have masks on. You're probably excited to take those off, so I'll try to not keep you much longer. But
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing it back to campus. This is really great.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, guys. That was fun.